Allison, it is really good to see you. You are in America and I am in the UK. What part of America are you in?
We're actually in Anderson, California.
Ah, right.
Yeah, on the Sacramento River.
Wow, that sounds really nice, actually.
It is really nice.
And it's sort of early evening here and it's morning for you.
Yeah,
Now,
we're just getting up and getting going.
you are. Well, Alison, today I want a penny for your thoughts. Now, do you know, Alison, how many pennies in an English pound?
Well, it used to be 100, but things may have changed. When I was a little girl, I think it was 120.
Well, actually, you say that, yeah. The pennies in an English pound was a 240 pre-decimal in that pre-decimal system. And then it became 100 pennies in a pound. So you were right about the 100 pennies there.
Halfway right. Halfway right.
I'm very impressed, actually. Now, Alison, I want to talk to you today about a rather serious matter, really, which is loss. And in John chapter 11, Jesus meets two grieving sisters, which is Mary and Martha. And if you read closely, they both came to Jesus that same day crying, Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died. And we read that in John 11, verse 21 and 32. However, Jesus's response is rather different to each of them. Mary and Martha both notice the same Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, we know both these sisters are grieving, but Jesus had different responses to both of these women. Now, Mary, Jesus saw her weeping, and he was deeply moved, he was deeply touched, and he saw her tears. And we know that Jesus also wept because Jesus took note of her grief. And with Martha, Jesus gave her hope because he said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. And that's in John 11, verses 25 and 26. Alison, you have experienced loss of a granddaughter and almost the loss of your son in a terrible accident. Can the Lord comfort us during those sad and difficult times? I mean, many have lost loved ones since the pandemic. What are your thoughts, please, Alison? I'd like a penny for your thoughts.
Thanks, Jeannie. Not only can the Lord comfort us, but he comes to us, and he comes to us in whatever we need, wherever and however we need it. As Rob and I were doing, my husband and I were doing our devotions, we read the word together this morning. And one of the scriptures loosely translated that came up this morning was in 1 Peter 4:19. And it says, this is loosely translated, he created us and will never fail us. He created us and will never fail us. And that's the good news. And while you were talking, I was reminded that we have a stillborn grandbaby. Her name is Posey. And when we were in the delivery room for Posey, we knew that that she was already in heaven, essentially, that my daughter would be delivering a child that would never breathe. We knew that, and so we're in the delivery room. Every fiber of our being was wishing for life, understanding that probably wasn't what we were going to get unless we got a miracle. And God is a God of miracles. But sometimes our miracles look differently than we want them to. And so I'm in this delivery room with my daughter Rosie. I'm standing with her, and as the birth is becoming imminent, every fiber of my being, somehow out of the depths of my spirit, I prayed the prayer, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. And I realized in that moment, in that prayer, because I meant that prayer, every fiber of my being wanted my beautiful, vibrant little granddaughter to live. I did not want to hold a funeral the moment we met her. Every fiber of my being's asking, God, if there's another way. And in that moment, I realized Jesus was qualified to come to us in our grief because he prayed that prayer before I ever did. And it was life to my soul, because it was like, we don't serve a God who doesn't get it. We don't serve a God who isn't qualified to come to us in the most painful moments of our life. And we will experience them. Our friends listening, even ourselves, we're going to experience more grief. This isn't the end of the road for us, but we can know, even as we experience grief, that Jesus prayed that desperate prayer of, God, if there's another way. Nevertheless, but I knew Jesus was qualified to come to me in that grief, in that loss, in that pain. No, we only held Posey for a few moments. We wanted to hold her for a lifetime. But I know that there is one who holds me. I know there's one who holds her. I know she's playing in the streets of heaven, probably picking up gemstones as we speak. But he's qualified to come to us in our grief. He doesn't condemn us for grief. He comes to us in it because he prayed a desperate prayer on a desperate night as he was getting ready to give it all so that we could have his all. He created us and he will never fail us. We call, he comes. But like you just said, Jeannie, he comes differently. He comes differently to different people. He doesn't treat us as cookie cutter people. He comes to us in the place of our need.
Yes. We need hope in God at these times, don't we? In that pain of loss and the grieving process. I mean, what happens, do you think, if people don't grieve?
Well, as a counselor, there's something called complicated grief. And complicated grief is where people seem to get stuck. Biblically, it seems that there's the valley of the shadow of death. And I mean, grief can take many forms, and we can grieve for lots of different things, but it's a valley. and I think scripturally it's, yea, though I pass through the valley of the shadow of death. And so I think if we feel like we're stuck, sometimes we're afraid to let go, because we think if we let go of those deep feelings of sadness, that we lose something even in that, because we're not thinking about our loved one in the same way that we were. But yea, though I walk through. And so my prayer is for anyone that's in the valley of the shadow of death, that we will have the grace and the space to continue walking through the valley, as opposed to getting stuck in the valley. And if we're in complicated grief, remember, he created us. He will never fail us. When we call, he comes. And so he can meet us where we're at. So if you're stuck, if we're stuck, we say, God, come to me in this place. Don't let me get stuck, but let me walk with you. Even if you walk slowly. It's okay to walk slowly. It's okay to take your time. this is not a marathon. Well, actually, it is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It can be a long journey. You know, we've heard about the dark night of the soul. Sometimes that night seems way longer than we want it to. Jesus wept. You said that too. And we need to remember scripturally, it says, weeping may endure for a night. And as I was preparing for our talk, what came to me was, even if the night seems long, the night may seem long for some of our friends. And when we've lost a child, when we've lost a loved one, because when we've lost a child, we don't plan to have children to lose them. We expect a life of joy and challenges, sure.
Of course.
But when we've lost a child, the night seems long. You mentioned our son who was in a terrible car accident. I mean, it wasn't a car accident. He was a pedestrian, and a dump truck, so a big semi truck, ran him over, drug him along the road, left part of his leg on the road, and drove off, leaving him like a piece of trash in the middle of the road. And I was on the mission field, so I was actually in the Philippines when I got the news. And I came, as I was preparing to come to my son, it was November, I'd been in the tropics, I didn't even own a coat. And I got to the hospital with a suitcase and the name of a hospital. And I didn't know what I was going to find, but there was something in me. And I called my husband and I said, honey, this doesn't look good. And if we don't get the miracle that we want, you're not the dad that didn't come. Because initially Rob sent me to go to the hospital, basically to assess. And when you're in the middle of that kind of crisis, in the middle of that kind of trauma, you really, hindsight's 2020, but you're just functioning. You don't have a roadmap for what you're going through right now. So my prayer is for everyone that's going through grief, be where you are and invite Jesus into where you are, realizing that you may never have done this before. If you have, you may have strength and wisdom to offer us. But this is a journey that we feel unprepared for, particularly when it's the loss of a child. But I said to Rob, we don't know what our miracle will look like, but there was a sense that somewhere, even if our son went to heaven, a miracle was coming. There was something in this that God would use for his glory. But you don't fancy that when you're in the middle of, but there just was a surrendered heart attitude of, okay, God, whatever our miracle looks like, will you be glorified in this season? Remember, he created us and he will never fail us. So even if we're in the middle of the valley and that valley seems so dark and so deep, may we have the grace to walk through, even if we have to crawl through with Jesus, because I believe I'm even seeing a picture of Jesus now getting on his hands and knees, crawling with someone through this valley, but he has not left you. He has not departed. He is very, very present. Weeping endures for a night, even if the night seems long, but worthy is his name. He will never leave us. He will never forsake us. Right before my son was miraculously healed, and there's no other way to put it, he was on life support. He was in very dire straits, and God was merciful to our hearts, and I know that. One of my best friends on Guam, their son fell in a climbing accident, and he didn't make it. And so here we are with our best friends whose son went to heaven, and ours, we still get to touch him and love him and appreciate the gift that he is here on earth. Walking with that juxtaposition and that respect that our journeys are different. People who have people who have experienced great loss don't need us to be uncomfortable around them. Don't think that talking about their son or daughter or father or mother, sister or brother, don't think that we're going to remind them. They have not forgotten their grief. We're not going to remind someone. We have an opportunity when we ask questions about someone's loved one, we get to enter into it with them. We get to not pretend that this awful thing has not happened to them. We get to join them in this valley, and maybe we get to walk with them for just a little moment more. And remember, this was something that has hit people's families that has been catastrophic, something that we don't feel we have a roadmap for. So, yeah, walking with people who are in grief is a big deal. And that was one thing, and I say this with absolute humility. My friends who lost their son, they said, you know, you're the only person that actually talks to us about our kid. Not like they haven't forgotten. You don't forget the loss of a child. No. And as often as someone brings this precious loved one into the story, actually it creates space to remember good things as well as the heartache and the loss. And if heartache and loss changes over time, for some it gets bigger until it takes its rightful place in our story. This is part of your story. This is not something to hide. This is not something to be ashamed of. This is not something that means we didn't have enough faith. Perish the thought. This is a part of your story that you get to crawl if you have to with the King of Kings, leaning on him, the one who is absolutely qualified to share your pain, because he felt it before we did in a garden, oh, so many years ago. Worthy is his name. As I was thinking about our time together, Jeannie, I was reminded that grief is actually part of our offering to him. In this time of heartache, this is an alabaster box that we bring. Our hearts are breaking, and we get to bring an offering of something very precious to us. It's very expensive. It cost us the loss of life and a loved one. It costs us everything, yet we get to pour out our love on him in this season. And that kind of really struck me, because you'll never have these times to offer this expensive of an offering. So spend it on the King of Kings.
I think you've got an amazing attitude, Allison. I really do. And what you say seems to make so much sense as well. So I think it's good that we can listen to people in their grief as well, because that can help others by listening. Or maybe we can do something practical to help, you know, even if it's just taking them some shopping. I'd like to ask you, some people have regrets because before that person passed away, they said, oh, I just wish I hadn't have said that. I was unkind to them. And they say things that they wish they'd never said, but it's too late. What would you say to that person today, Allison?
Well, good question. So I would say for some people to write a letter to the person and to just express the true feelings of your heart, and even ask forgiveness, and then offer that to the Lord.
Yes.
And this is me, but I would say, Lord, if that person needs to see this, then would you show it to them? would you express my feelings? Because God's present, Jesus is present in our moments. And if we need to write a letter asking for forgiveness, and then obviously asking Jesus for forgiveness and healing and cleansing. We can't change the past, but God, would you change me so that I'm marked by this moment, never to fall into that pattern? And maybe, Lord, use this to make me a better person while I'm here. Well, I think writing a letter for some people is very helpful.
Yes.
And then even if you need to bring it to a friend or someone that you trust or someone that knew the person that you're grieving. and again, remember, this is not your fault. You didn't cause, for the most part, you probably didn't make this happen. This happened, and here we are with the pieces, the shattered pieces of life that we will move forward from. Right. Or get stuck in. And living with regret is one of the places that we get stuck. But you beating yourself up is not going to help your loved one, and it certainly isn't helping you.
No, that's true, isn't it? And the Lord wants to set people free from that. He doesn't want them to carry that guilt around with them. I'd like to ask two more questions, Alison, if I may. And one is, what would you say to maybe a parent who has lost a child through suicide? Because that does happen in life. You hear it on the news and things.
So I would say, because there's some real controversy, I think, particularly in the Catholic Church, about people that commit suicide not going to heaven. But that grates against my whole concept of God. People who commit suicide are in such deep pain.
Yes.
And Jesus does not turn his back on people who are in pain. One of my best friends on Guam committed suicide. And it's beyond my concept of God to not treat someone who's committed suicide exactly the same way as he'd treat anyone else who had made a heavenly homegoing.
Right.
So I would say in the case of suicide, suicide is tricky because often before people make that, once people make the decision to commit suicide, very often they'll re-engage in life again. Basically, they're saying their goodbyes. So you can have a great period right before someone commits suicide, and everyone kind of starts to relax. Phew, we're over that hump. Our child, our loved one is coming back to us. And it's almost like false hope. And then the event of suicide happens, and it's devastating to everyone around them. But I would say it's not your fault. Very often there's underlying mental health conditions that contribute to suicide.
Yes.
To the suicidal ideation, sure. Whatever it is, it's not your fault. I feel like that's just the word that Jesus wants to minister this morning, is this is not your fault.
No,
it isn't. And we can't change. May God give you the grace to crawl with him to the foot of the cross and just lay the burden down of, this is my fault. If I was a better parent, if I had not done this, if I hadn't said this, the woulda, coulda, shouldas are going to kill us. We need to live because we still have the choice of life. And scripture says, choose life. Sometimes that's what it is. It's a choice. Yes. And some people aren't, if they're not strong enough in a dark night of the soul, in dark moments, to make the choice for life, we who are living get to continue to choose life.
Yeah, that's some good points there. And Thank you for that. I'm sure that will help people today. And the other question I'd like to ask is that some children, I have a friend, she died young at the age of 35 and left 2 young children. What would you say to children who have lost a parent? Because they're not going to have much recognize, you know, lots of
Recollection.
about their parent, are they?
Well, that's true. And if there's curiosity about the parent, then I'm sure there are ways to find out what a wonderful person your precious mama was. And in that you can basically, you as a kid, you could build this was my mom. And you could go on a scavenger hunt for tidbits about who was your mom. Who was your mom to her best friends? Who was your mom to your dad? Because sometimes when dads marry again, there's that, oh, he's marrying again. Didn't my mom mean that much? No, that's not true. Didn't my mom mean that much? That's not true that your mom didn't mean that much. It probably means that your mom was so amazing that she may have even been someone who encouraged your dad to marry again. But I would say go on a scavenger hunt and find out who your mom was. And no, she can't be with you right now, but the one who holds her hand in heaven can hold your heart here on earth.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Alison. Alison, can I say thank you for a penny for your thoughts today? This is probably been painful for you to share some of this stuff today, but thank you, because this will help others who are going or gone through these situations. So can I thank you for your frankness, openness, and some good advice today. Thank you, Alison. God bless you.
One more thing, Jeannie. Let's remember when I was going through this situation with my son,
Yes.
It was the word of God that kept me sane. Believe me, it was a time of insanity. And every day I went to the word. I didn't know what to pray. And I said, Father, what can I ask for today? And every day he'd give me something to pray. So in our valley, remember, he created you and he will never fail you. It's not in the playbook of God. It's not in the economy of God. He will not fail you. He will not forsake you. He will not leave you. Walk with him in this valley of the shadow of death. I love you, Jeannie. I love you, people.
Love you lots, Alison. And thank you for joining
Thanks.
me. God bless you. Thank you, Alison. God bless.
All right. Thanks, darling.
Oh, that was great. Thank you, my darling. Thank you. Alison, what does all this mean?
Oh, that's I love you.
Oh, is it really? Is that
in sign language?
I wondered what it meant.
In American Sign Language, that's I love you.
Well, I love you back.
Very good.
You were brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you for that.